Hi again, everybody. We're here with Adam and John for another episode of Fragrantica Talks. And today we're not going to talk about fragrance at all, which I know will, come as a bit of a surprise to some of you. But before you think you've got the wrong podcast and disappear off, we are going to talk about fragrance bottles because it's a lesser talked about subject, perhaps, but one when you buy a fragrance, the price of the bottle or the presentation makes up a significant chunk of that budget. Sometimes more, sometimes less. So we thought, given that it's such an integral and important part of the fragrance buying experience, we would devote a whole episode to talking about just that. So bottles, we might even cover presentation as well, in terms of the boxes. But yeah, so that's where we're going to be today. So I want to start by asking Adam and John, would you say there's a style of bottle or presentation that you guys gravitate towards, or is there something that puts you off? Um, you know, what if you could have all your fragrances standardized in one shape, maybe, or style of presentation? What would you pick and why?
I'm so glad that we're talking about this because I do think it's a more important topic than is often discussed, right? The idea that there is this idea that some brands don't even put much effort at all into their bottle choice because, either it's cost related, like you said, these bottles, they do cost a lot per unit if you're not a large house who has the advantages of economies of scale like a Chanel or another, large designer house. There's anything below that in terms of size and scope of company, they're going to struggle to some extent figuring out what they're putting their fragrances in. And I think it's worth discussing what the result of that is and if it's successful and if it matches the brand's personality and if it matches, the pragmatism of what a perfume bottle should be. To me, to answer your question, it's got to be pragmatic. You got to be able to pick the thing up, right? Not that everything in the artistic or craft world needs to be pragmatic. If you're going to go for a daring bottle that serves some artistic purpose, I'll humor that for sure. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to pick the thing up easily and not worry that it's going to poke or slip out of my hand or that kind of thing. I mean, part of that is my fault if it does, but it certainly, I think, behooves a good perfume to also have a well-designed housing, if you will. That's all I'll say for now, because I have a few ways in which I judge a bottle that I'm sure we'll get into. But how about you, John?
Yeah, that I'm glad you brought up that whole issue of the practical aspect of it. Like I remember a when I started making some perfumes on my own, I talked to someone about package design, and this is someone who works in pretty well known within his field within package design industry, and I learned a whole bunch of things about why things are packaged the way they are, and even down to the way that flaps go into a box, and the flaps go in a certain direction so that it'll sit firmly with a flat edge hitting a surface in a certain way. Like, there's very important reasons why things are built the way they are. And what I think was interesting in it is, when we were talking about the aesthetics of something like packaging, I kept talking about the look and feel and all this stuff. And he kept reminding me and saying, well, it's there to protect the bottle, like the function of the box is to protect the bottle, John, don't forget, and to house the bottle. So I keep that in mind a lot of times, where it's interesting, funny, amusing, creative to see unique bottles and packages, but ultimately they're there to house the juice itself. And some can do it with a certain amount of flair, but if it can't really effectively hold it, dispense it, and keep it somewhat safe from light in the right conditions, all of those like sort of check boxes, then it starts to kind of, any sort of amusement that it presents starts to fall off the scale for me, and I'm like, it's the practicality of it is really becoming negligent there. So yeah, there's something about that balance that I think is important about a bottle.
I think that's really important. And I think actually it's a nice segue into me showing you my first bottles, if that's all right. Because now these bottles, two different brands, and you can probably guess which at least one of them are, they're pretty much identical. They've got different coloured caps. Now, these are from two UK indie houses, Jorum Studio and 4160 Tuesdays. Now, I've spoken to Sarah McCartney about this at length and about how difficult it is for smaller houses to get a glass mold, prohibitively expensive, like you say. It's not just about the economies of scale obviously plays into it, but the cost for setting up that mold, regardless of then getting the bottles made in that mold. I've heard figures from 20,000 upwards, 20,000 GBP upwards to set that up. So that's a huge cost, particularly when a brand is relatively small or will be doing, in the hundreds rather than in the thousands or millions of units. And so what brands do in the UK particularly is there is a small company, or well, maybe a big company. I think it's actually perhaps an arm of a big company called Poshpak, and they are able to supply small-ish numbers of bottles to British smaller houses, and without them, in many respects, the UK indie scene wouldn't exist in the form that it does, because so many houses buy their sort of standard, buy one of their standard bottles, they put a different cap on it. Like this one from Jorum is quite a matte cap. This one from 4160 Tuesdays is a sort of shinier gunmetal cap. And that's, and they can be screen printed like this one is, or they can have like a label stuck on like this one is. So brands can still inject that sense of individuality, but it's on a standard bottle shape that they are able to get in small quantities, which makes it far more economical for them. It's far less wasteful, and it can allow these, smaller, but they're by no means, we're not talking cottage industry houses here. We're talking just small but very successful brands. This company allows them to kind of thrive without having to have, without having to find the vast amount of money that it would take to get a custom bottle made. So I've decided that I'm going to name those, that bottle shape as one of my favorites, purely because, not for the aesthetics of it, but purely because it's facilitating the fantastic creativity that we're starting to see growing in the UK now, and these fantastic brands wouldn't be able to do that perhaps without these standard bottles sold in small quantities. So do you have a bottle that you think is maybe really elegant that we can talk about?
Well, I think I have a couple elegant bottles, and I've noticed that they're sort of similar in shape and dimension. So maybe that's worth bringing up now. I have sort of separated my bottle picks today into a number of different factors, like just pure aesthetics, and this will be, I'll talk about these two in terms of pure aesthetics, sort of their feel in the hand. I'll bring that up here as well. How well they match, or how well they match like the feel of the brand that they're a part of, and then the evolution of bottle design that some brands display. But right now, I wanted to bring up a couple that I think are, to your point, they're elegant, and I've noticed that they're similar shapes. One is this classic Dior Prive line bottle. Well, it's not just the Prive line bottle, isn't it? Is it sort of an extended version of Dior Sauvage? It's just a little taller. What I like about this is the font is really clean, but also very distinctive of the brand. Now, not every brand can do that. This is sort of relevant to Dior as a brand. They're well known for more than just fragrance. So obviously their font is going to be a little bit more recognizable to most than, sad to say it, 4160 Tuesdays, right? I mean, more people know about the Dior brand.
I mean, I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I don't think everybody's going to be offended by the idea.
I would hope not. Hey, Sarah. So what I really enjoy about this is just that it lets sort of the very vibrant color of the fragrance sort of speak for itself. It is exercise in minimalism, which I'm not always a fan of, but I just like that it's easy to hold. You open it up and it's easy to spray. It's not like a ton of work for your hand to kind of wrap around this graspable shape for most hands and then depress it to spray. I mean, it works, and it always works. And that's something I think is worth exploring too, is like the idea of physical accessibility, right? Not everybody has the same hand mobility that, me, a freshly 30-year-old might have, with no physical ailments or no physical disability. So, that's something that I think is important. Like I said before, you have to be able to spray the thing, right? And I think a good bottle design or a good bottle shape can be beautiful and sort of iconic like this is, but also still, very easily spritzable for most. And the same is true of this from that Le Galion brand. They were a classic brand from, I believe, late 1800s, early 1900s that was sort of recently revived. Yeah, they're really good. And, again, it has like this sort of tall, cylindrical shape. It's a bit thinner than the Dior in terms of its circumference and its overall kind of width there. So it's a little bit easier to grasp, but it's very similar in height. So it has that kind of presence on a shelf that looks nice and stately. Again, the label is, if I'm going to deduct points, maybe a little more minimalistic to a fault. I think they, if they wanted to add a little bit more vibrancy to the label, they probably could have gotten away with it without distracting from the overall appearance. But that was their choice, and I can't necessarily speak ill of them. What I do like is that the actual label itself has yet another texture on it, apart from, as you can tell, like the sort of ribbed texture of the glass. That's really nice. It's really just sort of nice to pick up. It feels good in the hand. It's very easily graspable, and again, very easy to spray. There are some bottles of different shapes that, because they're a little stout and maybe more square, they're not as, your hands kind of have to go through gymnastics to wrap around it and then depress the sprayer. This cylindrical, semi-tall shape is just always easy for me to hold. I don't know how you two feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to turn this into some British kind of carry-on movie, but I've got to ask Adam, do you find the ribbed more pleasing in the hand?
Nice. Well,
I feel like, to your point, I feel like we're back onto like one of those old British like sitcoms where everything was a double entendre, like a "Are you being served" kind of thing. Right. I love that. No, I do. As a matter of fact, I do, because okay, one thing that that Le Galion has here that Dior does not is that it has texture that, listen, physiologically, it does stick a little bit easier. Whereas if I was just handling some cooking oil or butter, I dare not grasp this expensive Dior fragrance. But Le Galion, I think I have more of a chance at saving if it starts to get a little wibbly wobbly. This is all very specific, right? What might work for me might not work for everybody else. But I would think that, theoretically at least, that general shape can maintain a sense of like simplicity and iconicism while also retaining that element of pragmatism that we were talking about earlier. That's just my opinion about it. I would love to see a brand do that, but have a more colorful label, or a label that has maybe some intricate design work on it, because you can easily print a label. There are a variety of lower cost but nice looking printing options, as opposed to not so high variety of bottle shapes. So that would be something I'd like to see in the future from brands. But I am fond of that bottle shape for a number of reasons.
I have, I think, the next kind of step on from that shape bottle, if you will indulge me.
Of course.
Please.
Which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
Neela Vermiere Creations. And
Mm-hmm.
the bottle, I can actually tell you the bottle designer is Pierre Dinand, I believe his name is. It has that ribbed texture, which I find really pleasing. It's got this slightly like more designed shoulder, and it has this little foot as well, which I don't know if you can see very well. No label. The label, it does have a label. It's on the bottom. Very, unobtrusive. Quite hard to read the label. I don't mind that. But I think it's such a beautiful bottle, and the way the light refracts on the ribbing, I find really pleasing.
It's also a bit like wider on one end and narrower in the center, right? It's also
Yeah,
like it's
yeah,
not cylindrical, like fully round cylindrical, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's really interesting.
And it has the cap is really heavy and metal, which just sort of seems, it's got that slightly, it's slightly person-like, it's got
Right.
a head and shoulders, and then kind of leads down to feet-ish.
That's true. I think there is something that, these vertical bottles, they speak to the idea of like personal shapes, at least in the background of our
Figurative,
psychology.
I think, is the word you're both searching for. Yes. No, I think you said people like, right?
Yeah.
A person like. No, I was thinking about that too. The statuesque is another word I was thinking of. Yeah, like.
What about you, John? Have you got an elegant bottle?
I have, and the funny part is that it's also ribbed. But what's great about this is I'm really proud of the fact that it's one of the oldest bottles that I have continuously owned in my collection. Like I have older antique bottles, but this is something that I personally have owned for a long time, and I'm proud of the fact that the label is really worn, but it's one of my oldest Eau Sauvage Christian Dior bottles, which is still one of the classic shapes of all creations. And what I do think I love, the fact that it has the diagonal ribs of glass, is the fact that it also soundly fits within the hand, like as almost like a deck of cards, and that I do, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe some listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this was supposed to reference a flask, like a liquor flask, which, I'm not of a generation that carried flasks around. I mean, that was, I think, something I don't think any of us are, where you kind of held something in your, for us, for me, it's always like, I don't know, like an October football game or something, when you like put a little flask in your, jacket pocket or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know what, I don't have any reference point for that, but it does have that feel that you could almost put it into like a lapel pocket kind of. But I also think, I have such happy associations with Eau Sauvage, and the kind of in a sense, the simplicity. I know it's not a totally simple fragrance, but for me, it's very much a bright, simple kind of fragrance. And there's something also about the fact that the way that the glass is ribbed feels like it's maximized to catch as much light as possible, that like refractions like sparkle off of it. And that's what I've always loved about this bottle. And it's just the epitome of like brightness, freshness. It's the kind of thing that you would almost want to have on a shelf in the bathroom, to greet you in the morning, type of thing. That's sort of what I've always loved about it. And I do think it's very elegant, and it's something to say that they haven't ever changed this bottle since 1971, since it came out. It's still the same bottle now. So it's quite a long time for our industry for something to remain pretty much unchanged.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think this one is pretty elegant. And there's another one I wanted to bring up, which I think is elegant in a sort of architectural way. And unfortunately, I have, quite a few things here that are sadly discontinued. And I think that sort of says something, that some of these things are classic and are still being made, and some are not. And I wonder what that means about, the expensiveness of glass, and, how some things just maybe were too expensive for a company to keep making. But there was a wonderful line, and people know that I love this line, and it's not made anymore. But for a while, Molton Brown made this incredible series called Navigation Through Scent. And the bottles are just stunning. They were these sort of very architectural, abstract, kind of glass on one side and then steel on the other side. They're really crazy bottles, aren't they? They look a lot like, this could easily be a building in New York, like next to the World Trade Center or something. I do believe that they were just far too expensive to keep producing, and it's probably why the series was replaced by the current bottles, which are nice but not nearly as complex as these were. And what I loved about them is they were each they were like a specific, they actually list a specific place on the planet, and I'm sorry, on the planet, on the earth, and the actual navigation points that you could get to. What I think it was literally this juxtaposition of like the very shiny steel and this completely abstract patterning of glass that really spoke to kind of mid-century modern sensibilities in a way that is to me, this reads as something very elegant. I think some people might find this tacky. I found it incredibly elegant and beautiful, and like something I think my father would have liked. I don't know if that matters here, but something my dad would have found kind of impressive to have around, as an objet,
Yeah.
And I feel bad that they didn't, that they kind of gave up on these, and they're really gone. I've even tried to find a few. There's a couple online available here and there, but I think people really they love these bottles and will not sell them, So yeah.
Yeah, when you were showing it, then it looks quite 70s to me.
Yes.
It's kind of sort of, and it made me think of do you know the film A Single Man, which I think Tom Ford might have directed?
Oh, I have not actually seen the film, but yeah,
Colin Firth in it?
Colin Firth was in it, right?
Yeah, it's set in the most beautiful kind of it looks like it's been designed by Geary, does the house. It's absolutely gorgeous, and that bottle looks like it would be on a kind of beautiful teak bookshelf in that that sort of thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
How does it feel in the hand though? Is it sharp? Those edges look a little bit sharp.
No, the edges are smoothed over just enough. Like if you do sort of rub it, it is sort of like a massage type of device. Like it's definitely got a bit of texture. But it's not sharp. No, it's textured but not sharp, but still smooth. Like it's smoothed over just enough. It's actually, that's just interesting that you mentioned that, because they do stick out a bit, which I think was sort of intentional, as again a foil to this really, to these very bright and shiny bits of metal. It's quite an interesting mixture of textures that way. Wild design, but yeah, you're right, it does have a 70s feel to it, very much so.
Yeah. I also wonder as well if there's a gendered thing. I'm interested as to whether we'll end up picking different things because of our differing genders, or whether a certain aesthetic will appeal, differently to us as as different people.
It's interesting you bring that up, and actually, if you both don't mind to indulge me for a second, I kind of want to take that one on for a second, because there was a brand that has gone through a lot of evolution that I wanted to bring up, and they did at one point have a very interesting branding scheme where they had gendered versions of their fragrances, even though the fragrances were the same. And that was Annick Goutal, which has done tons of different bottling schemes. And I've kind of done I'll do a quick parade through the ages here. But at one point for each fragrance, they would produce a women's version, which actually also has sort of ribbed glass, and a very kind of old world, old-fashioned sort of Italian looking bottle. And then they would do sort of a very kind of clunky men's version, not always in this dark brown glass either. But I always found it very funny that there was this, even with the same fragrance, if it was a unisex fragrance, they would have this version and this version, and which I think they kept doing up until their first rebranding effort, which that first one was more or less just a rebranding of the label. So they kind of redid that. So it wasn't actually that, but then they decided to change. This was sort of like, I think, version 3 bottling, and this only lasted for one set of eau de parfums that they did. Was a group of 4, I think, which were a little bit more kind of, okay, let's make a decision somewhat between the two, so a slightly more rounded version of the boxy shape. And then finally, they've rested upon this now, non-gendered shape, which is kind of veering a little bit more toward what was the sort of women's version of the parfum, with what appears to be a far more minimalistic cap and a heavier bottle. And it also kind of feels, I really do like the final design, actually. I think this is, I don't know quite what it is, but I feel like it's almost as if they've sort of reached a place where they have been able to merge those two ideas of doing the gendered presentations into something that does seem like a fair compromise of both, without sort of tossing one out, and actually kind of, both being represented in a way that seems fair or whatever.
Yeah.
But then again, it also transcends that whole idea of it being sort of, a specific gender or something. But I think it's interesting to see a brand that's, tried to somewhat keep some of their personality afloat through all this, but in the end, coming up with a unified design as a bottle.
I think what's nice about it as well is that my response to that was to like the last one most. I think it is the most elegant. I think it is the most sort of satisfying looking and feeling of them, actually. I thought particularly the men's ones were quite ugly at times. I mean, I'm not sure I really liked the first women's one either, but by the end of that kind of little tour that you kindly gave us, I thought, yeah, that's quite nice now.
Yeah, no, I agree, definitely.
But on that, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Nicola.
On that kind of rounded shape, this is one that I really like. Now, so this is the Arquiste bottle. And, it's no secret that I'm a fan of the brand. But I really like how these feel in the hand. So like my hand goes around it really pleasingly. And the cap is really well attached. So you've got to really try to get it off. And I'm just going to try and let you listen to the really satisfying click it makes when I put it back on.
That was extremely satisfying.
It's really good, isn't it?
And those who love mechanical keyboards will go ape for this one.
But yeah, they're just, it's really simple. I think they're all the same. Some of them have colours applied. So Sydney Rock Pool's blue. One of the other ones is black. I like the simplicity of the kind of clarity of this with the name screen printed on. But then you think, well, it's kind of minimalist, which I would say that I probably do gravitate towards. But you get to see really nice little details. Like, for example, can you see there's an A there embossed into the metal lid, which I really like. Hang on, here's the click again. And yeah, I love how this feels in my hand. Now, Sonvenine do a smaller version of this bottle, which is also really attractive. And there's something about the fact that they look like little bubbles, which I really like. And somehow, I don't know, it feels quite fitting, that kind of bubbliness. So I don't know, something to do with fragrance bubbles. I don't know.
It's funny. I actually had also taken the Arquiste bottle to talk about during today's session, so that's cool. Was your bottle there a 50 or a 30 mil?
I think it's 100.
Oh, 100. Okay. So it's funny because we must have very different sized hands, because this is a 30 and it looks about the same size as yours did in your hand.
That is funny, actually.
That's hilarious. I have boutonniere number 7 here. It doesn't matter, but I do really like that. I can't resist. I just like this fragrance a lot. Sniffing it. I do like that they fit so easily in the hand, primarily, especially the 31. But I will say, interestingly enough, my 30 ml bottle does not have the same click as you can see here.
No.
That was it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I didn't hear a thing.
But I will say, okay, it fell after some cajoling, but it's not like I picked it up and the cap just went, right off.
Yeah, I'm glad we've got a point of agreement there, because they are beautiful bottles, definitely.
They are. Well, so continuing on the slightly rounded shape and maybe bringing it back to the gender thing a moment, I will say that Hiram Green's bottles are really interesting because they are a very unique kind of almost bell jar, but a little bit wider kind of shape. So it's a cross between a bell jar shape and a that globular shape that we just held up with the Arquiste. I don't think this is a very genderable shape in general. I don't think what I mean by that is I don't think many people look at this shape and go, that's supremely on either side of the biological spectrum, right? I don't think people are associating this with any particular sex or gender. And I think that I really like, what I really enjoy about it is that similar to the Arquiste bottle, it's very easy to pick up, very easy to hold, and very easy to hold while you spray. Your hand just sort of very naturally fits around it. Nothing feels stressed. Nothing feels like I'm overextending any of my digits, if you will. But another cool thing about it is that the cap on this, you would look at it, and we're very used to caps fitting over the entire neck, covering the entire metallic neck cover. And on this one, it actually, as you can maybe see here, not the best lighting here for this, but you can kind of tell that this little space in between the cap and the body is not part of the cap. It's actually part of the neck. And I have never before seen a fragrance bottle where the fact that the cap doesn't cover the neck doesn't somehow make it look goofy. It actually adds to the shape. I think a lot of the time when the cap doesn't quite fit around the neck, it looks almost misplaced, right? Or not thought through. But in this case, I think it kind of adds to the profile. And I really like that. It's a clever detail. Oh, another thing about it being kind of bell jar shaped, there's something kind of botanical curio about that, like something you might go into like a strange botanical shop that also sells like statues and lawn ornaments and like skulls and things. It's an all natural brand, and I will say having something like reminiscent of a bell jar shape that houses an all natural perfume that stresses the power of botanicals is an interesting and cohesive move to me.
Yeah. On that note, also on the kind of cap note, I'd like to ask you both, how do you feel about scents that don't have caps? So I've got one here, which is Olibanum. Instead of, you can see this, instead of having a cap, it has this like little tag, pull, and it's kind of, it stops the thing depressing when it's on.
Right.
And but it doesn't have that cap function. So I think the idea is that it limit, it kind of reduces the waste on the materials that go into making that. What do you both think about that? Do you think that is, less attractive, or does it bother you?
It's a little fussy, isn't it? You have to putz with it. You have to think about like, oh, I don't want to lose the little part. Whereas I feel like, for me at least, it's harder to. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn because I know a lot of people lose their caps. But to me, telling tales out of school, apparently, I think that it's more difficult to lose a nice meaty cap, like, for example, this Dior one, than it is to lose that little thing. I feel like that could get stuck in a couch cushion and never be found again.
Yeah. I think that's probably right. I don't mind it though. I've had a couple of is it Montal. I think they have
Yeah,
this
that's the
one
first
as
thing I thought
well.
about was Montal.
Um,
Yeah, and I have a couple of Montals, and I've and of course on the Montals they have that little, like, what do you call it, like a charm or something that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
swings when you know.
Mm.
And I do find I'm sort of doing a thing where I'm like taking it off, putting it down, putting it on. Like it's a little bit of a it feels like a slight impediment to putting the perfume out, which I know it shouldn't be because you're also taking a cap off. It's no different, but it does feel yeah, maybe it's because I'm just there. It's not nearly as frequent as having a cap, so
Mm.
it may just be I'm not used to the ritual of taking the sort of uh I don't know what you call it, but yeah, that sort of guard off, if you will.
Yeah,
But yeah, and I always feel like you could bang it in a certain way and it would just sort of like,
yeah,
I know what it is. Like a cap, if you drop a cap, I don't feel like you're going to necessarily break the cap. Like they're
mm,
pretty sturdy things generally. I feel like you could easily bend one of those, like
yeah.
those guards, and it would pretty much, you'd be like, okay, well, what do I got to find some way to, like, but yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I think it's clever, and it may take away from some of the weight of a cap, which may make
Mm.
them easier to ship, or there's probably some good reasons for its development, I suppose. Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's what they were going for was the weight and trying to just really reduce any additional gubbins that ultimately may end up in landfill.
Right.
Whereas I think that can just be
Right.
removed. It's metal, so it might be recyclable,
Right.
depending on where you are. But yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Thank you.
I think the brand too that you just held up, the Olibanum or Olibanum brand, I think they do it better than is it Montal?
Montel.
No, it's not Montal. Sorry, is it Montal?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's what we're talking about.
I think they do a better job of it. I feel like I actually have a smaller version of the Olabodum bottle, the sample size bottle version that's only about this tall. And I really like the shape of their bottles, and I like the shape of the taller one that you just held up. I think it rests in the hand nicely. So even if my preference personally isn't for those little insertable things that hold the depressor from going down, if my preference isn't for that, but I can kind of forgive them of it because first of all, they're doing it for a very good reason. Second of all, I like the rest of the bottle better
Mm.
than other examples of houses that do it that way too. So yeah, I kind of give them some applause for that.
Yeah, great.
That's cool.
So what about things that are more, everything we've talked about so far, it's been focused on the glass, it's been focused on the shape. Do we have any examples of things that are a bit more over the top that we find attractive?
I could say one thing that I just absolutely loved, and it's also a perfume house I like, but I think it's been a very clever way of creating a visual pun, of creating like it does so many things, and I haven't seen anybody quite do this, but I'm a very big fan of the French perfume house, Histoire de Parfums, and they have, really quite elegant bottles. They're just thin rectangles with these very nice little corners taken out. But what I particularly love are their smaller sizes in which they actually cut the bottle in half, which is absolutely brilliant. Which I don't think anyone has done something like that. So that literal, and it's not quite cut in half. They've sort of moved the middle over, but you get the idea, and the visual pun that we're going to give you half the size, and that you can even take a few and sort of line them up and make sort of new bottles with two stock. I mean, it's so clever and adorable and wonderful, and and they even do it with their small sizes. They make kind of half bottles as well too, which it's so clever, and I normally hate clever ideas, like clever stuff. I'm usually like, oh god, it's not funny, it's not cute, but this is just so good and well done. It's amazing. I don't know, so
I
that gains a lot of traction for me, I have to say. Really
I
does.
really like they've got one that's blue with a
Yeah.
got a circle. I think that's every time I see that in a shop, I'm like, ooh, it looks really nice. It's such a lovely blue.
Well, you know, it's a like a quadruple entendre of it's part of that series called This Isn't a Parfum, which is based on the I'm forgetting the painter now, but the surrealist painting of, you know, This Isn't a Pipe, but it's actually really based on the Yves Klein blue series, which is just his solid blue pigmented painting. So it's all about art essentially, and that whole signature Yves Klein blue. And yeah, I think they've really gone kind of crazy, and I love what they've done with that idea of the, you know, kind of art perfume, you know, direct references to art. I don't know if anyone's really done that so much as they have,
Yeah.
making such direct and even insider jokes. In fact, those perfumes is called This Is Not a Blue Bottle, and I was afraid that I don't know if a lot of the American audiences understood, like, that it's a reference, multi-layered reference to art objects, and people said, but it is a blue bottle. Like, yeah, right. I know that was a tough one, but yeah, no, they're fantastic, and apparently I've heard that they sell incredibly well, and I think part of it is literally because of the attraction of that blue bottle. It's so
Yeah.
vibrant and fascinating and weird, you know, to see that kind of blue glass, like bright blue opaque glass like that is unusual
Yeah.
I've got a couple of examples of kind of, I don't know if over the top is the right phrase, but just bottles that, you know, when you compare it to something like this, the minimalism of this style, kind of have a lot more to say and are designed a lot more. One is from Areej le Dore, and this is actually, for many reasons, the only Areej le Dore bottle I have, and it might ever be, I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, I fell in love with the scent, and I thought that the bottle is quite interesting. So this is from, and Areej le Dore fans will know the generation and all the gritty details, but the house changes their bottle design like every kind of generation or new release. So that's kind of chaotic in and of itself in a way, because it's like you have to do so much legwork on each of the generations. But what this is it's a very pleasingly simple shape, but it's sort of embellished with these like custom imprinted like felt kind of label there. And then the cap itself, first of all, you have to really yank it off, which is a good sign. You can, not that you should ever carry any fragrance by the cap, but if you had to carry one bottle by the cap, it would be this one. But yeah, again, I can't one-hand it. I have to. So this cap is like a really satisfying, smooth, polished wood. And then on the top of it, it has, I mean, you know, probably nothing too precious, right? But like this sort of stone, glossy, polished stone thing going on. And it's really pretty. I will say this bottle looks 10 times better when the light is different and sort of the brilliance of the fragrance kind of illuminates all the rest of it. So in better lighting, the label looks even more just well designed and statement making. And so does the top here. In this light, it kind of looks a little muted. But it's just an interesting thing to like put so much effort into designing every new set of releases bottles, and to make and that's not even the all of it. You know, this generation of releases from Areej le Dore all have this bottle shape, but they each have different colors on the label, different colors up here. I think some of them use different wood on the cap. So, you know, just taking all that time and effort to change it up every release is in and of itself a small marvel that I think deserves some credit. I mean, that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I'm sure there are many people watching who think, I don't care, is the fragrance good? And that's probably something many people would think for the entirety of this chat. But you were saying before, Nicola, that, you know, if we understand that no matter whether you're buying from an indie niche or, you know, large designer house, a lot of your purchase goes into the cost of the bottle. If we're accepting that, then we should, I think, respect when a house does something particularly noteworthy. So I think it justifies, if you're going to buy a very expensive, natural driven, but not all natural scent like this, you may as well also give them something nice presentation wise. And I think Russian Adam successfully delivered on this generation at least. And another example is Maison Incens. There is something Javoy-like about this bottle design.
Similar proportions,
I'll say, the font is really where they get me. This just looks really cool when you like display it in this profile. The font is really nice. It's simple, a little casual, but also kind of distinctive and a little classy. It's got this reflective, but not too like overly blingy, to your earlier point, Nicola, label. And then it has like a little stamp there. I'm not sure if I even love the stamp. It's interesting and it adds texture that I think the bottle needs. But I really love just the design of this being on the side of this like oblong bottle shape. The cap is nice. It's not magnetic, but it sticks on quite well. And then something, I guess I have to deduct a point or two because it makes it a little trickier to spray because your hand kind of wants to go like this, but when it does, then you have to then extend the finger here or here to actually depress it. So, if I'm being really picky, which we are in this round, I guess I maybe subtract a half a point there, but it is interesting in terms of its shape, and it's got a lot to look at, and it's very easy to display in a nice way. So I kind of like that about it.
I think the founder of that brand as well really pays a lot of attention to design. I saw them at Essence, and they've got a new range, which are round bottles, but they've all got the label is made out. It must be some kind of stone paper, but they're all, he said the labels are stone and they feel like stone. And they're all slightly different. They've all got different striations in them and different kind of inclusions. And they're really interesting. They feel really it's kind of this sort of round, organic feeling bottle, but then this hard textured label. It's really quite cool. And he obviously gives a lot of thought to the design because when, you didn't go and smell the whole range, you went and you picked cards and they were all really beautiful illustrations and photographs that represented the fragrances. And then I had to pick two that I thought I gravitated towards, and Chypre Islay was one of the ones that I ended up really loving, actually. So I think there's a lot of, I think some brands, not that they neglect that side of things, but they put all their thought into the kind of the scent and that's it. But I do think there are some people that become consumed by the whole universe that they're creating with their brand. So right from the label to the to the stamp, to the cap, to everything, they kind of obsess about the details. And I find that quite interesting. And I think sometimes it can have really exciting kind of consequences. And I think, they can come up with quite an interesting product as a result. Now, I've got one which I know is going to divide people. So hold on to your hats. So this is the House of Oud. Now, it is a unique bottle, definitely. So, even I feel conflicted about it. So this is the cap. The bottle inverts and then goes into the cap. The cap is very weighty. To my mind, the cap is too blingy. It's very shiny. It's very gold. Not such a fan of the cap. I love that the bottle inverts, though. I find that quite satisfying. The bottle feels really nice in your hand. It is a little hard to spray. You've got to kind of do a bit of hand gymnastics. But if you get it like that, it works, perfectly adequately well. But each of these bottles are different. They're all treated differently. They're all different colours depending on the fragrance. And I don't know, I sort of feel a little bit like it's by far the blingiest bottle I have. But there's just something nice about the actual bottle itself as being a bit of art. It's definitely an objet for sure. And just they feel really nice, and I like that they look a bit like an egg. Like you're gonna hatch some kind of crazy dinosaur baby out of that, or maybe a dragon. And I don't know. There's something it's definitely unique, and it definitely one that I want to have on a shelf, because people, they don't know that it's necessarily a perfume bottle because it doesn't look like one. And they can't work out, what you take off in order to spray it. And yeah, I think it's interesting. It's maybe
One
not the
person's overly blingy is another person's excuse to discovery, right? The fact
yeah,
that you don't know where the perfume bottle begins and ends actually does sort of invite you in to kind of pick it up and handle it and then spray it, right? So maybe there's some serious intention and not just like let's bling it out to the max behind that
yeah.
decision.
Yeah. So I think I do think they've done something interesting there that is kind of noteworthy. And another one that I do think it's a bit over the top, but I really like it, and I like how functional it is as well, is M.INT. So this comes in a box. This is I believe it's aluminium, some sort of metal tube that entirely encases the perfume. Now I like this for several reasons. First of all, it's got a pretty strong magnet in, so you get a nice, like when you get it right and you sort of sit it in, you get a nice little clack, which I find quite nice. But I love the fact that it completely and utterly keeps the perfume dark. So there is no light getting through that whatsoever. Even in bright sunlight, you're just not going to get through it. So I like the fact that it feels like it's keeping the fragrance, safe. As it is, mine is in the box in a cupboard, so there's not a chance of light getting to it. But the bottle, I don't think you'll be able to see this. The bottle itself has got this kind of knitted cover, which is
I don't like a sleeve or something on it, right?
yeah. It's a little bit tea cozy like, like a pot warmer. And then it's got this ribbon, which is held sort of on and together by this little clip. And I mean, it does feel quite fussy. It does feel quite over engineered. But the thing that I just find so satisfying is that if I'm taking this with me anywhere, I can pop that on. It's quite secure. I can chuck that in a bag. Yeah, the canister might get dented, but the bottle's absolutely safe, and no chance of the light getting to it. I think in terms of, if we go back to what you were saying, John, right at the start about protecting the juice, this for me actually is probably the most protected juice that I have in my collection, because it's very, very robust and it's very light tight. The things that we know we need to keep perfume away from. So yeah, potentially over engineered, but I've got a lot of time for this. And you could maybe perhaps use it as a cudgel as well if anybody comes for you. It's quite
the range that you just brought to the table, Nicola, between the House of Oud and M.INT fragrances. The House of Oud's bottle looked like something, to your point, it looked like a dragon egg, like something that you'd find on the set of Game of Thrones, whereas this one from M.INT, it looks like something a spy might carry around, or even how a spy might dress. Like, maybe this is a bit of a specific reference, but I feel like Kim Possible, for those of you who are aware, might have something like that in her bag. I don't know. It's fascinating.
Like Kim Possible is a personal heroine of mine, so I'm really glad that you brought that reference up.
Well, full circle there. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I have, just looking at what I brought today, I have an example of just something that for no particular reason, I just like it. I have an example of something I really don't like. And then I have an example of how houses can sometimes go through such extreme evolutions in their bottle design. So where are you two at in terms of what you have left to talk about today?
So I have one that I don't have it with me because I sold it because it's so ugly. So we can talk about the ones that we don't like, and I've got one that I really like.
And John has a lot.
I have I'm good for anything. I have one that I really, really don't like. I have one that I wanted to just bring up as another example of something you had, Adam. And I've got like a handful of, some good designs for different reasons, but I'm good for anything moving forward.
You've piqued my curiosity, Nicola. I'm curious to know, can we all go around with something we really don't like and explain why we don't?
Nice.
Yeah. So mine, which like I say, I sold because it was so ugly and it offended me every time I looked at my shelf, was Moschino's Love Love, which is, that kind of that phenomenon of uncanny valley in robotics and stuff, where if you make something look too human, it creeps you out.
Absolutely.
I can see John's Googling it and I'm waiting for the disgust on his face to appear. There it is.
Oh, yeah. And this was, yeah, okay, yeah. This was this was sort of almost a flanker to, they did a few with that sort of head, the funny looking head on top of that, right? Okay,
Yeah.
but do go on though, yeah.
Yeah, it's
I see your point now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Winnie's just joining us. Yeah, and it was. Don't lick the microphone. It was difficult to hold. It was difficult to spray, and I didn't like. I just didn't ever want to pick it up because it just looked so tacky. And I think it was Moschino that also did the ones that looked like window cleaner or bathroom spray, and I know some people were kind of amused and charmed by them, and that's fine, absolutely fine if you were. Probably better than my revulsion and disgust at them. But to me, perfume's a luxury, and I don't ever want to forget that. I don't ever want to think that it's something that I have a right to or that I can necessarily afford for the whole of my life. So to me, there is something treasured about putting the ritual of putting on in the morning. And I want the bottle to reflect that. I don't want the bottle to make me think, have I picked up my perfume or have I picked up the window cleaner? So there was an irreverence about it, which I found annoying rather than funny. But and that's totally just me personally. But yeah, particularly Love. Oh, horrible bottle, ugly.
Yeah, it's bad. It's very bad.
Yeah.
How about you, John? Do you have one that you hate?
Oh, I really do. I want to stress the fact that this was given to me as a gift and by a dear friend, and the fragrance is actually quite nice. And I hope at some point to send both of you samples of it. It's a very lovely violet leather fragrance, very nice violet leather fragrance, but and everything about it is just wrong to me in many ways. The name, it's just a clash of horrible design. So it's a fragrance which is made by Sonia Rykiel, and I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, the fashion designer. She passed away not too long ago, I don't think. It's called, the name of the fragrance is called Woman, which I just have always found difficulty with a name like that. It's saying a lot to just call it Woman, and it's clearly, cutting off a lot of your audience, I think, but but the bottle is hideous. It is by far the most hideous thing I've ever seen in my life. But I'd like to talk a little bit about why it's so hideous, because I think it's important. First of all, the cap is disgusting. It has these sort of like copper, like bumps of sorts on the top, right? So it's this mixture.
The top looks like it's got the plague.
Yeah, no, it's spots essentially on the cap, and then you have the other problem of like these horizontal stripes of frosted glass and clear glass, which is really problematic. Like, I don't know why that was just chosen as a thing. I think she did do striped knitwear. Some of that might have been part of her thing, but it's horrible. And then you have this bright flashing magenta, label on top of like the copper color. And then to make it even worse, just in case you forgot, her initials are then emblazoned on the top in this very bold, blocky script. I mean, it's so many design flaws in one bottle. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And so the sad part, again, this was a gift from a friend, and thank you so much for this bottle. And the fragrance is lovely, but it's atrocious. It's atrocious. And I think mixing so many horrible design things together, and particularly like gloss with frosting and with half semi-gloss and all of this, like that is nothing like scrapes my spine more than texture differentiations like that. And one thing, horrifying. Anyway,
yeah, it is a bit of a stinker, that one. What is it? A fragrance from the 80s? Because it has a sort of 80s look about it.
it must have been. It was either 80s or early 90s. I'm just gonna really do a quick look, but how many fragrances were named Woman? Just as that. Um, uh, I will find that out. Adam, what have you got there for us?
Oh, I'm glad that you talked about texture too, John, because I think texture is important. We were talking, I mentioned earlier, like the importance of accessibility in terms of, is it depressible easily for most hands and most like abilities, right? And that's something that I think the industry should just pay attention to, generally speaking. Another thing too is that I think we're coming to a point now where I think we can respect with a degree of earnestness the idea that some textures to feel, to touch, are very unpleasant for many people. And by unpleasant, I don't just mean I prefer not to have something feel like this. I mean, might set you off a little bit, might make your teeth grind, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this fragrance called Eau Dynamiste, Eau Dynamisante from the skincare brand Clarins. And you know what? It's a beautiful eau de cologne, very refreshing. And the 25th anniversary bottle design of it is kind of monstrous. It's like ruby red slipper to the max. You can't really tell, but those are sparkles.
Nice.
They're very fine sparkles, and what you might assume by looking at that and by hearing fine sparkles is that the resulting texture, I hate doing that, it is that of sandpaper. Okay, it literally feels like sandpaper.
Oh, so it's not like a glossy
no
finish.
I know it looks glossy, but actually I don't know if you can't really see it as much, but
No, I can't.
I'm literally shivering right now touching the thing. It's like as if they put a very fine sandpaper wrapped around the glass. Now, in addition to that, I mean, I think that the shape leaves a lot to be desired. And again, this is coming from a skincare brand that I think doesn't really focus on fragrances as much as they focus on other things. So, like, I can forgive them. Like they don't need to design the coolest bottle ever. But the bottle is just kind of it's just kind of like, it doesn't say anything, not that it needs to, but I mean, it could do a better job. The actual label is like an afterthought with the cheapest material to print on ever. And it's just sort of attached to the bottle on a hope and a prayer there. The sprayer is fine, whatever. The cap is a really like, it's the type of thing that you can just see someday in 100 years, some sea creature choking on. It's that kind of tacky plastic that you're just like, okay, well, all right, fine. It's a cheap bottle and it's a cheap fragrance. You can get it for like $25, and that's great. There's something to be said about accessibility in terms of price. It's just that when you hold the thing, you get eked out that, like, not only is it uncomfortable to hold because it is like sandpaper, but you also get the feeling that this like glitter, and I can see it now, much to my dismay, that this glitter material is going to kind of like come off on your hands, and then you'll have grit on your hands. And I just hate that. It ekes me out. It's so monstrous to me. And
I was gonna say, it's weird to have a fragrance where it seems like after you apply the fragrance, you have to do this. Like, that's wrong. There's something very wrong about having to do that.
And I know we're not talking about the smells. It's such a shame because it's like the whole shtick is that it's supposed to be like an eau de cologne that's like really easy and invigorating and cooling. And in this particular model, they infused it with like an aloe vera substance to make it a little bit easier on the skin. And I'm just like, that's great. I'm going to need that on my hands after touching the darn thing.
That's why they did it, though. It's like kind of creating their own market.
Right, increasing the demand. Oh my God.
Oh, wow. You're right.
I really just get eked out by that. So that's the thing that I abhor bottle design wise.
Yeah, that's gross.
Yeah.
Why don't we go around and just finish on a sort of happier, less icky note with one that we really like. For no reason other than we like it.
I like that. That's a nice idea. I can go. I wanted to bring up something that is, it's not terribly well, it's a classic thing, and I finally own one, and I've seen them before, and I thought, oh, those look rather, kind of posh and expensive, and I have one, and I realize now why there's something so nice about them. But I have one of the large Creed bottles, which and I was always wondering, I didn't know, like, why do they come with this sort of leather thing up on top of it? And it helps you to remove the glass stopper, because it has a glass stopper, which a lot of bottles don't have anymore. And this is Royal Mayfair, which is one of my very favorite Creeds, and not a very popular one, but there is something about this old, large, like kind of almost apothecary-ish type of bottle that's just kind of glorious and beautiful and simple. And it's a little overdone with, the logo printed everywhere, but then again, it's actually it's a simple bottle, and I do love the fact that somebody is still making a glass stoppered bottle. A major line, even it's a kind of a niche line, is making a stoppered bottle. And I do say there's something kind of beautiful about having a glass stoppered bottle. I don't have very many of these of a contemporary fragrance, very few actually. And I like too that it's a splash bottle. I love putting on splashes. A lot of people don't like them, but I love splash bottles. And I like the feel of it. I like the way it looks. It does feel like you've kind of made a bit of an investment. So I do wear it quite often, because I'm like, I better use this up. I don't want to go to waste. But it's a very it makes a lot of senses feel. It's a very sensual experience on a number of different levels, and I enjoy that of it. So that's a big vote yes for me on that one.
Cool. And yeah, points for the only glass stoppered bottle we've had so far tonight.
Yeah, I think so.
How about you, Nicola? What's something you just like?
It's this one. It's Areej le Champagne. I mean, I love history, and I love things that give you a sense of place, and particularly if that place is important to you. I love the juxtaposition of the square, square bottle with the sharp. Well, I mean, they're not sharp; they are rounded, but it's definitely a square bottle, and I think there's something very brave about putting that with a round cap. And the cap, I love that it references the cathedral window in the town that the brand was set up in, which I think is Atre in Italy. They relocated to Tenerife, but I love that they've retained this reference to where they came from. I think it's really pretty. I mean, it's very it's very present. It's very there. I love that it references a church window. I think that's really, there's something very aesthetically pleasing about stained glass and the regularity of the pattern in it. And yeah, it's that mixture of square and round that I just think I think it's brave, and I think it works. Yeah, I just think it's really nice.
It's almost like the height
ahead.
of that cap is like the cathedral, and then the square base refers to like the brick and the mortar used to build the cathedral. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's almost like a mini cathedral in one, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't quite realize the reference at first to the stained glass, but it really, now it's like, oh wow, of course it's right there in front of you. Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, and this is they made the caps gold for 10 years when they've been in business 10 years. It just, again, I just think there's a lot of thought gone into that, and I find it really pleasing.
Yeah, very nice.
I had just a couple of things to end on here. Atelier Cologne, I just think their 100 ml size is just very, very pleasing to hold. The glass is really like very thick, very pleasingly thick glass. By contrast, the cap is a bit lighter, but it's sort of a nice, smooth, like fake leather feel to it. What else is there to say? There's some like very, very small raised arches on the design on the front here. But it's really just so subtle that you barely notice it. I just like that it's just super solid glass. The shape is easy and accessible and does the thing it needs to do. I will say the cap is nice because it's kind of a wider cap. And so I think different hands, different fingers, will have an easy time with it. What can I say? It's just a beautiful design. Now come back to the States, Atelier Cologne. I am very cross with you for leaving us. And then the other thing I really wanted to quickly mention is just like, it's really interesting when a house, particularly this is like common among like the niche and indie houses that are smaller scale, so they have to, deal with supply chain issues and all that. But it's really interesting when a house goes through a lot of artistic designs over the course of their span. I will say, Slumberhouse is noted for doing this. Anybody who's a fan of Slumberhouse knows that they have quite a few bottle designs over their 10 or 12-year history. And so I don't have every single one of their iterations here, but I just thought it was interesting just to compare how very different they are. This is the oldest design that I have from them. It's sort of known as the flask design for obvious reasons here. There's some like little pebbles at the bottom of this. The fragrance is pear and olive. It's an amazing one, but like most slumber houses, it's long discontinued. What's interesting is like this like almost fence post or something a little bit more regal design of this like cap and shoulder at the top. It's all kind of one style or one piece. Except for the cap that comes off here. But it's really interesting. It says the name of the house. You can't really see it in this shot, but it's very nice to hold. I think a lot of people like this design the best. So that's my earliest bottle. They have a couple other designs that were earlier than this that I don't have. Compare that to something that came out like a couple of years later, but very, very different. Look at this. I mean, it's almost like a kind of reminiscent of that newer Serge Luton's bottle, where it kind of looks like a Art Nouveau skyscraper. I really liked this design because it's sort of another kind of common bottle type that many indie perfumers can get easily. But he kind of distinguished the house by putting this like metal plate with like this very distinctive lettering of the word GREV, Grev. In very stylized lettering, and even a completely different cap too, a rubber one. And then more recently, the house has moved towards these two designs, very different, right? And it's sort of amazing how the same person in the same house can go from something like this to something like this, right? And I just find that very fascinating. He likes these throughout. I will say one consistent thing throughout the house is that this etched kind of quality of the lettering, it's hard to see in this, I unfortunately have to admit. But yeah, I just really find it interesting when a house is like brave enough to say, for reasons of supply chain or for reasons of personal artistic taste or both, hey, we're going to switch things up. We're going to do something completely different, and it still somehow communicates the mysteriousness of what we do as a brand.
So I just want to check a couple of things with you, because I've been noting down as we've gone the qualities that we agree on for making an ideal bottle, so that at the end we can kind of come up with the perfect bottle. I want you to answer quickly. Is it okay for a brand to change all the time, or do you want them to stay static? One or the other. You can't have both. In terms of their bottle.
I want them to stay. Well, I would only say I want them to stay static if I like the design enough for it to stay that way.
Yeah,
but that's a smarmy response. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know we should do this quickly, but like, what I found delightful about the Galion bottle that Adam had before was that I have one in my cabinet that's from 1950, and it's the exact same bottle as the new one he had, and I thought that was wild. But having said that, I'm all for, like, the progression of time, like, we have to move forward. So I think it's really, really important to move forward and let people be creative and change. I mean, so I would almost veer toward, like, if standardization is, if someone is bored with making the same thing, please let them change, which I firmly support that, more than like keep it the same. So I would actually say that change is better.
You two are going to be hard to get single word answers out of, aren't you?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Right, sprayer or splash?
Sprayer for me all day. I just like the action of it.
I'm actually going to vote also with sprayer. I love the novelty of splash. Sprayer is easier. Yeah, it's easier, but God, let me have a couple splashes though.
Rounded or angular?
Rounded. Even the fragrances I picked today, like again, this like Dior kind of tall shape, it is a simplistic design that you would associate with like square bottles, but it's rounded, and I like that.
I'm gonna go with angular. I love some rounded bottles, but I think the angles interest me more than the round stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So from that, I think we can conclude it should definitely be ribbed. It should have a cap. It should be tall, so sort of elongated. It shouldn't have a texture that icks Adam out, so nothing sandpapery.
I love.
If it's a good design, stick with it. If it's a bad design, change it. It should have a sprayer, and it should perhaps be more rounded. So I think that, if somebody makes a round ribbed bottle, I think they're onto a winner.
Now that actually,
much. I agree that if I see that, I'm going to be drawn to it, just because, as I said before, I think it shows light to its optimum, and I think that's what all of us like. We love to see light, like just like this. It attracts the eye, and I think that's a thing that I like, and I think a lot of it like. Yeah.
Great.
Well, I mean, I'm curious to know what our viewers and Fragrantica audience thinks about this. I'm sure we will inspire opinions that are endless on this topic. I know everybody, despite whether you want to think of yourself as like a smell first kind of fragrance appreciator, you have to admit, like when it's a nice bottle, it's quite pleasing, and it speaks to some level of thoughtfulness that kind of separates the wheat from the chaff in so many ways. So I'd be curious to know what our viewers think.
Yeah, and if there's any bottles that you love or hate, let us know, because I really feel like we've only just scratched the surface with this, because as we've talked, I've thought, Orm and Jane have got a great bottle that is very classic. Filippo Sorcinelli has got the interesting bottles that have got the clouds on top. We could go on and on about this for days. So yeah, I'd love to know what people think, and what you really like, but also what you really hate as well.